"Please, just make it quick," she said, but the rancher lowered his gun and chose to save her. The twin sons of Xiron 7 had already begun their slow descent behind the jagged mountains of the outer plains. The sky was painted in harsh shades of orange and red, and the desert sand shimmered with the dying light. Mara stumbled across the dry, cracked earth, her breathing ragged, her body trembling from the bleeding wound in her side. Every step she took sent small clouds of dust into the air. The distant hum of hovercraft engines echoed faintly, a sound that made her heart race faster. They were coming for her. They always came for her. She had run from one planet to the next, changing identities, scrambling through abandoned stations, and stealing rides on freighters that didn't ask questions. But this planet was different. Xiron 7 was lawless, harsh, and unwelcoming. Perfect for hiding, yet perfect for dying. The scorch of the sun against her skin reminded her that help would not come from anyone in the open. Not from the settlers, not from the traders, not from the mercenaries who hunted her. Only the wind and the empty plains answered her cries. Mara's vision blurred as she stumbled over a jagged rock. She fell to her knees, grit scraping against her palms. She could barely lift her head, her ears ringing from a shot that had grazed her side. Every breath felt like fire burning inside her chest. And then through the haze, she saw him. He was standing on a small rise, silhouetted against the twin suns. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, and a long coat fluttered slightly in the dry wind. The weapon slung across his back glimmered faintly in the last light. Some sort of rifle, not like anything she had seen in the galactic armies, more like a hybrid of old frontier technology and new plasma tech. He didn't move toward her immediately, he simply watched, his posture calm, steady, and unyielding. Mara raised her hands weakly, her fingers trembling. "Please, just make it quick," she whispered, her voice cracking. She expected him to fire. She expected him to end her pain with one clean shot. She didn't want to die, but the pain of running, hiding, and bleeding out alone had finally pushed her to the edge. But the rancher didn't fire. Not yet. Not at all. Instead, he lowered his weapon, letting it hang loosely across his chest. He tilted his head slightly, watching her, as if assessing the worth of her life with a patience that seemed unnatural. Mara's pulse jumped. Was this fear, relief, or something else entirely? "I don't kill the desperate," he said quietly. His voice was low, calm, and strangely comforting, yet heavy with the kind of experience that only came from someone who had watched too many die before their time. His eyes were sharp, gray, and cold, but not without a flicker of curiosity. Mara didn't know whether to trust him or run. Every instinct told her to flee, but every muscle in her body was screaming that she could no longer run. Who are you?" she managed to choke out, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Name's Jace Holloway," he replied. "Rancher. Not a bounty hunter, not a marshal. Just a man who knows how to survive out here." Mara's brows furrowed. How could someone survive out here and not be part of some gang, some government force, some group hunting for a reward? The Outer Plains didn't forgive weakness. Jace seemed an enigma, calm in a place that demanded ruthlessness. And yet, something in his eyes told her that he had rules, a personal code that went beyond law or profit. I can't stay here," Mara whispered. Her body shook violently, and she leaned heavily on the nearest rock for support. The sun was setting faster now, and the shadows stretched across the plains like the hands of unseen creatures. "They'll find me." "They'll have to catch you first," Jace said simply. He stepped closer, though cautiously, making no sudden movements. His boots scuffed the dirt softly, but his presence somehow made Mara feel less alone. She had been alone for so long, running through systems and planets, surviving only by luck and speed. This man, this stranger, seemed different. He seemed human in a place that had forgotten what humanity meant. Jace looked her over with a practiced eye, noting the shallow cut on her side, the faint streak of blood on her temple, the exhaustion that seemed to weigh her down like a heavy cloak. "You're not dying today," he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a statement, cold and absolute. Mara wanted to believe him, but fear still gripped her. "What if they come back?" she asked. "What if they see you helping me?" He smiled faintly, the corners of his lips twitching as if amused by the very thought. "Out here, you either fight or you die. That's the rule of the plains." Mara could barely process his words. Fight? She was too weak to lift her own weapon. Her body was shaking too much to aim. Yet she felt an odd sense of relief that someone, anyone, was choosing her life over his safety. Most people would have left her to die or finished the job themselves. But Jace, he had chosen otherwise. Slowly, he extended a hand. She hesitated, instinctively pulling back, then gave in, allowing him to help her up. His grip was firm, but careful, like he understood how fragile her body had become. He supported her as they walked toward a battered, hovering vehicle half buried in the sand. The craft looked old, patched in several places, but it had a familiar hum to it, the sound of something that had been cared for and maintained over decades. As they approached, Mara noticed symbols etched into the hull, marks that spoke of a long history, of places the eye could not see, of dangers that lurked in silence. Jace climbed in first, gesturing for her to follow. She hesitated, then swung her leg over the edge, collapsing onto the seat inside. The interior smelled of oil, dust, and old leather, but to Mara, it smelled like safety. A small, fleeting comfort she hadn't felt in months. Jace ran a quick check of the systems, flipping switches and testing the engines. The hum grew stronger, vibrating beneath their feet. "Hold on," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon outside. "The planes aren't safe after dark." Mara swallowed hard. She wanted to ask where they were going, what his plan was, but she had no energy left to speak. Her body sagged against the seat, the adrenaline slowly leaving her, replaced by a heavy exhaustion that made every thought feel like dragging through sand. The hover scout lifted slowly from the ground, hovering above the plains. The twin suns cast long shadows beneath them, and Mara watched the dunes fall away as the ship glided silently. Jace kept his eyes on the horizon, hands steady on the control. It was clear he had flown these paths many times, knew the dangers and where to avoid them. Mara felt a strange mixture of awe and dependence. She had survived alone for so long, but now, in the presence of this enigmatic man, she felt for the first time the possibility of trust. Hours passed as they glided over the jagged landscape. The sun finally disappeared behind the horizon, and the first twin moons rose, bathing the desert in pale silver light. Mara looked out of the viewport, watching shadows stretch across the dunes. Somewhere out there, the mercenaries, the hunters, the ones who had come for her, would be searching. And yet, she felt a spark of hope. For the first time, someone had chosen to save her instead of leaving her to die. She turned to look at Jace, but he was focused entirely on the controls. His expression was unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat, but his posture exuded calm strength. She realized that he was not just a survivor, he was a protector. And somehow, in the vast emptiness of the outer plains, that was more dangerous and more valuable than any weapon or technology in the galaxy. Mara didn't speak. Words were useless now. She simply leaned back and let the motion of the hover scout carry her across the desert night. Somewhere ahead lay safety, or at least the promise of it. And as long as Jace kept flying, she would live to see another sunrise. Somewhere in the distance, the hum of engines, the rustling of sand, and the distant cry of night predators reminded her that the world was harsh, unforgiving, and dangerous. But for now, she was alive. And that was enough. The rancher didn't speak much, didn't offer comfort or explanation. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a lifeline, a reason to keep breathing when every other reason had faded. Mara understood that survival in the outer plains wasn't just about avoiding death. It was about finding the rare sparks of humanity that still existed in a galaxy that had almost forgotten how to care. And in that moment, Mara realized that she had found one of those sparks in the most unlikely of places, a lone rancher who had lowered his gun and chosen to save her. The hover scout hummed through the night sky, weaving between the jagged canyons and abandoned mining rigs scattered across Xiron. Seven's outer plains. Mara leaned against the wall of the cabin, trying to ignore the steady throb of pain in her side. Each movement reminded her of the shot she had barely survived, but she also knew she had to stay alert. Somewhere out there, the mercenaries were tracking them, relentless in their pursuit. Jace, sitting behind the controls, didn't speak much. His hands moved with precise familiarity over the ship's instruments, adjusting speed, course, and cloaking functions. He had flown these planes countless times, and Mara could feel the calm efficiency radiating from him. She had spent months running alone, relying on luck and quick thinking, but now she realized that survival sometimes required more than that. Sometimes it required a guide, someone who understood the land, the dangers, and how to bend both to your advantage. "You're quiet," Mara said, her voice hoarse from disuse. Jace glanced at her, eyes sharp beneath the shadow of his hat. "Quiet keeps you alive out here. Noise draws attention." She nodded. Even though she wanted to argue, to talk, to distract herself from the pain and the fear. She didn't know why, but she felt safer in the presence of this man than she had felt anywhere in months. There was something about him that suggested strength and experience, but also a kind of honesty that was rare in a galaxy filled with deceit, greed, and violence. Hours passed in tense silence. The twin moons cast cold light over the jagged landscape, painting everything in silver and shadow. Mara's mind wandered. She thought about the people she had run from, the ones who would stop at nothing to capture her. Every time she had escaped before, it had been by sheer luck or cunning, but this time she had someone watching her back. That thought made her chest tighten, not with fear, but with a strange, almost foreign feeling. Hope. Suddenly, Jace's hand moved over the console, activating the ship's external sensors. "They're close," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the holographic display. A squad of mercs, fast hoverbikes.
They know exactly where we are.
She had hoped they had lost their trail in the plains, but it seemed the hunters were persistent, well-equipped, and not easily fooled. She looked out the viewport and imagined the flash of energy rifles, the roar of engines, and the cold glint of helmets under the moonlight. "They'll catch us if we don't act fast," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. Jace's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but a grim acknowledgement. "Then we act faster." He tilted the ship and dove into a narrow canyon. Mara gasped as the walls of stone flew past, mere feet from the hull. The mercenary sensors probably couldn't track them so closely here, she realized. Jace knew every twist, every shadow, every obstacle of this terrain, and he used it like a weapon. The hover scout weaved like a horse through the canyon, engines humming, dust and debris kicked up in the pale light of the moons. Mara's fear didn't leave her, but adrenaline sharpened her senses. She clutched at the side of the seat, trying to keep herself steady. She couldn't help but watch Jace. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and confident. He wasn't just surviving, he was controlling the chaos around them. For the first time in a long time, Mara didn't feel powerless. She felt like she was part of something bigger, something that wasn't just about running and hiding. Suddenly, the hum of engines grew louder behind them. The mercenaries had followed, cutting through the canyon at breakneck speed. Mara's heart pounded. She could see the red sensors glinting through the darkness, their plasma rifles aimed and ready. She swallowed hard. There was no way to outrun them in a straight race. They were too fast. Only Jace's skill, his knowledge of the terrain, and perhaps a little luck, would keep them alive. His hands moved across the controls, activating the ship's cloaking field. The hover scout shimmered and vanished from view. Mara gasped, pressing herself against the seat. The mercenaries flew past, their bikes kicking up clouds of dust and sand, unaware of the invisible ship nearby. "They won't stay gone for long," Mara whispered. "They'll keep searching." His voice was calm, almost serene. "We have time. And the advantage." The ship glided silently through the canyon, moving deeper into the outer plains. Mara watched the walls, the jagged rock formations, and the scattered remains of old starships half buried in sand. Each one told a story of failed settlements, lost travelers, and forgotten battles. Mara felt a chill. Zyron 7 was beautiful, but it was also merciless. One mistake could mean death. Hours turned into more hours, and the night stretched on. Jace didn't speak unless necessary. He scanned constantly, adjusted the course, and kept a steady grip on the controls. Mara couldn't stop watching him. He had the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death countless times and chosen to survive, and more importantly, chosen to protect others even when it was dangerous. Finally, they reached an abandoned mining outpost perched on a cliff, overlooking a deep valley. Jace landed the hover scout gently, and Mara felt the relief wash over her. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was a temporary refuge. "This place, it's abandoned?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For the most part," Jace replied. "No one lives here permanently. It's a good hideout for a night or two." Mara slid out of the hover scout, limping slightly. The cold night air hit her, and she shivered. Jace was already checking the perimeter, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon. Mara noticed a small crack in his demeanor, a subtle tension that he didn't show outwardly. He had chosen to protect her, and now the responsibility weighed on him. They set up a small camp inside the skeletal structure of the outpost. Jace patched up her wound as best as he could with a portable medkit. Mara watched him work with quiet amazement. His hands were steady, precise, and gentle in a way that seemed almost impossible considering the harshness of the world outside. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Her voice held curiosity, fear, and a flicker of hope. Jace paused, looking up at her with eyes that reflected years of experience. "Because someone had to," he said simply. "Out here, it's not always about the law, not about profit. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing." Mara didn't know what to say. She had spent months trusting no one, relying on no one, and now this man had chosen to risk himself for her. That simple act, simple in words, but monumental in reality, left her feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Grateful, hopeful, almost safe. Night deepened, and Mara lay against a wall, trying to rest. She could hear the distant hum of the plains, the wind carrying the sound of unknown creatures, the faint echo of engines far away. Somewhere out there, the mercenaries would regroup, planning their next move. But here, in this small, abandoned outpost, Mara felt a fragile sense of security. Jace kept watch by the entrance, his silhouette dark against the dim glow of the twin moons. Mara watched him, realizing that he wasn't just a guide, not just a protector. He was the difference between life and death on this planet. Without him, she would have already become another forgotten victim in the outer plains. With him, she had a chance. Hours passed slowly. Mara drifted in and out of sleep, her mind replaying the events of the day, the gunshot, the mercenaries, the wind, the endless plains, and always the image of Jace, calm and determined, refusing to let her die, refusing to pull the trigger when it would have been easy. When she woke, the first rays of the twin suns were beginning to light the horizon. The world outside was harsh, endless, and unforgiving. But inside the outpost, Mara felt something new. A glimmer of hope, a chance to survive, and the faint spark of trust in a man who had risked everything to save her. She sat up slowly, stretching her aching muscles. Jace was already moving, scanning the horizon, checking the hover scout, preparing for whatever would come next. Mara realized that survival wasn't just about hiding or running. It was about courage, strategy, and sometimes relying on someone else. And for the first time in a long time, Mara knew she wasn't alone. Not really. Somewhere in the outer plains, the mercenaries were still hunting. Somewhere beyond the cliffs and canyons, danger waited. But Mara had learned something vital. The plains were harsh. The universe was dangerous, and the line between life and death was thinner than a blade of glass. Yet here, with the silent strength of a man who had chosen to protect her over the easy path, she felt a flicker of hope, a flicker that maybe, just maybe, she could survive the night, and the next. And that thought, small as it was, made every step, every breath, and every heartbeat worth fighting for. The first light of the twin suns barely lit the horizon when Mara woke to the sound of distant engines humming across the plains. Her heart skipped a beat. She had hoped the night had brought them some safety, but the outer plains offered no real rest. Danger never slept, and the mercenaries hunting her were as relentless as the desert heat. Jace was already up, standing by the entrance of the outpost, his rifle cradled in his hands. His eyes scanned the distant canyons and valleys with unshakable focus. Mara noticed a crease in his brow, a rare sign that even he, the unflinching rancher, understood the stakes of what was coming. "They're close," he said quietly. "Too close to ignore." Her side still throbbed from the old wound, and every muscle protested as she forced herself to stand. She had survived so far only because Jace had chosen to protect her. Now, she realized, survival wasn't about hiding anymore. They would have to fight. Jace led her to the hover scout and activated the sensors. On the display, small red dots appeared, moving steadily toward them. Not just one group this time, but two. Mercenaries in plasma hover bikes, fast and well-armed, cutting through the rocky valleys with precision. Mara felt a chill creep up her spine. They weren't coming to negotiate, they were coming to kill. "Can we outrun them?" she asked, voice shaking. Jace shook his head. "Not in a straight race, but speed alone isn't the answer." He glanced at her, eyes sharp beneath the shadow of his hat. "We use the terrain. We make them chase shadows, not us." Mara didn't fully understand yet, but she trusted him. She had no choice. Over the past day, she had learned that Jace's calm, precise movements weren't just skill. They were experience, honed by years of surviving the merciless outer plains. She needed to follow his lead if she wanted to survive. The hover scout lifted off the ground with a low hum, engines vibrating through the cabin. Jace steered them toward a narrow canyon, walls jagged and uneven, where sensors might be tricked and speed limited. Mara clutched the seat as they dove between rocks, the craft weaving like a wild animal. The red dots on the display followed them, moving relentlessly but slowed by the tight turns and sharp drops. "They're good," Mara whispered. "They're not giving up." "Good doesn't mean smart," Jace replied. His voice was calm, but his eyes scanned every shadow, every ridge, every crevice where an ambush could lie. "They think they can force us into the open. They'll try."
"But we're not going there."
Hours of tense maneuvering passed. Mara's nerves were frayed, her body aching from the strain of keeping balance. She could hear the faint hum of engines, the distant clatter of rocks disturbed by the mercenaries' pursuit. It was relentless, like a predator closing in, and she felt fear press against her chest like a heavy weight. Suddenly, a flash of light streaked across the canyon walls, a plasma bolt aimed at the hover scout. Mara yelped, ducking instinctively. Jace reacted instantly, pulling the craft into a tight turn, dodging the shot. The bolt slammed into the canyon wall, sending sparks and dust flying. "They're hitting hard," Mara said, her voice tight. "We can't keep this up forever." "We don't have to," Jace replied. His eyes flicked to a narrow ridge ahead. "We fight smart, not just fast." He maneuvered the hover scout toward the ridge, skimming low over jagged rocks. Mara could feel the craft shudder as it scraped the ground in places, dust and debris kicking up around them. The mercenaries followed, blinded by their assumption that speed was the only path to victory. But Jace had other plans. As they approached a choke point, a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides, Jace activated the hover scout's cloaking field. The ship shimmered and disappeared from view. Mara pressed herself against the seat, holding her breath as the red sensors of the mercenaries passed harmlessly by, unaware that their prey was invisible and ready. Then, without warning, Jace emerged from the shadows, firing carefully timed bursts from the ship's rear turret. Plasma bolts struck the lead mercenaries' bikes, sending them spinning and skidding across the canyon floor. Mara gasped as the display showed several red dots vanish, disabled but not destroyed. Jace never aimed to kill outright. He wanted to neutralize the threat, to protect without crossing the line. "They won't stop," Mara shouted. "More are coming." Jace didn't respond immediately. His eyes scanned the horizon, analyzing every possible approach. "Let them come. We're ready." As predicted, the mercenaries regrouped, splitting into two squads, trying to flank the hover scout through alternative paths in the canyon. Mara felt her stomach tighten. There was no way to avoid confrontation now. They were entering the heart of the fight. Jace's hands moved like lightning over the controls. The hover scout rose above the canyon floor, engines flaring briefly, before dropping behind a cluster of jagged rocks. Mara could see the red glows of plasma rifles sweeping across the shadows, looking for any sign of them. "They're going to try the ridge," Jace muttered. "Hold on." Plasma fire lit the canyon, striking rocks and scattering dust. The hover scout dodged every bolt with calculated precision, Jace leaning into every movement, his face calm, almost serene in the chaos. Mara realized that this man had survived countless encounters like this, not because of luck, but because he understood timing, terrain, and the instincts of hunters. Every movement, every decision was deliberate, keeping them alive while wearing down their pursuers. Then came the crucial moment. A narrow passage ahead offered either escape or death. Jace's eyes flicked to Mara. "You ready?" he asked. I think so," she replied, her voice trembling. "Good. Trust me." He pushed the hover scout forward, accelerating toward the passage. Plasma bolts struck the edges, sparks flying as the ship dodged with impossible precision. The mercenaries followed blindly, their speed and aggression becoming their own weakness. As the hover scout passed the narrowest point, Jace activated the ship's gravity flare system, a defensive mechanism that created a sudden, localized gravitational pull. The pursuing bikes lost control, skidding and colliding with the canyon walls. Mara's heart pounded as she watched the mercenaries crash and tumble helplessly, their pursuit halted without a single life lost. For a moment, silence returned to the canyon, broken only by the hum of the hover scout. Mara exhaled shakily, feeling the adrenaline slowly fade, replaced by awe. She looked at Jace, who finally allowed a faint smile. "Not out of danger yet," he said, "but we've slowed them down." How do you do this? How do you stay so calm?" Jace's eyes met hers, gray and steady. "Because panic kills. Fear is a weapon in the wrong hands, and because I've learned that protecting life is worth more than any bounty or prize." Mara understood in that moment the truth behind the man who had lowered his gun when she was most vulnerable. He didn't act out of law or profit or obligation. He acted because it was right, because someone had to act. The rest of the day passed in tense caution. Jace guided the hover scout through hidden valleys, over jagged cliffs, and past ruined outposts, always aware of the mercenaries' movements. Mara's muscles ached, her side throbbed, and her mind buzzed with exhaustion. But she felt alive in a way she hadn't in months. Each passing hour without being captured or killed was a victory. As night fell again, they found a secluded alcove behind a cliff, hidden from sensors in sight. Mara collapsed onto the ground, leaning against the hull of the hover scout. Jace scanned the perimeter, his figure dark and silent against the faint glow of the twin moons. "You're amazing," Mara said quietly. "I don't know how you do this. I do what I must," Jace replied, his voice low. "You've survived this far because you can keep moving. And now, you've survived because I chose to keep you alive." Mara looked at him, a mixture of gratitude, awe, and something like trust blooming inside her. She realized that survival wasn't just about running or fighting. It was about finding someone who would stand beside you when the world wanted you dead. And Jace Holloway had done just that. Somewhere out there, the mercenaries were regrouping. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, the danger still waited. But for the first time in months, Mara felt a glimmer of hope. A chance to survive, to fight another day, and maybe, just maybe, to trust again. Because in a galaxy of hunters, killers, and lawless plains, she had found someone who had chosen to protect her when it would have been easier to kill her. And that choice, Mara realized, was more powerful than any weapon in the universe. The first light of the twin suns cut through the horizon, casting the jagged peaks of Xiron, Seven's outer plains in harsh gold and orange. The night's battle had left Mara exhausted and sore, but the worst was yet to come. From the ridge ahead, she could see faint red glows moving across the plains, mercenaries regrouping, relentless as ever. They hadn't given up, and neither could she. Jace Holloway adjusted the controls of the hover scout, his hands steady and calm despite the danger. His eyes scanned the horizon with the precision of a man who had faced countless threats and survived them all. Mara watched him, leaning weakly against the hull. She had learned so much in the past 2 days: how to survive, how to trust, and most importantly, how much strength one man's choices could give another. "They'll come again," she said softly, trying not to let the fear in her voice show. "They always do," Jace replied. His voice was steady, unshaken, carrying the weight of experience. "But this time, we're ready. Not just to run, but to end this chase." Mara's pulse quickened. End it? She wasn't sure she understood. They had survived ambushes, outrun mercenaries, and hidden from sensors, but now Jace was talking about confronting them head-on. She had never seen anyone face danger like this before, and a mixture of fear and trust surged through her. "Do you think we can?" she asked. Jace looked at her, gray eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "We have to. If we keep running, they'll never stop. Out here, running buys time, not safety. Today, we fight smart." The hover scout dropped from the ridge, skimming low over the jagged desert. Mara could see the mercenaries' red sensors glowing faintly in the distance, their bikes kicking up clouds of sand. They had split into 2 squads, trying to flank them from both sides. The canyon walls offered some protection, but Jace knew this wouldn't last long. He leaned forward, activating the ship's cloaking system. The craft shimmered and vanished from view. Mara's heart raced as they moved like ghosts through the canyon, unseen but not invincible. From the corner of her eye, she could see the mercenaries' bikes spinning in confusion, searching for a target that wasn't there. "They'll figure it out soon," Mara whispered. "They might," Jace said calmly. "But they won't be ready for what comes next." He maneuvered the hover scout toward a narrow pass, barely wide enough for the craft. Plasma bolts streaked past, striking rocks and sending sparks flying. Mara ducked instinctively, heart hammering. The mercenaries were getting desperate, reckless, and Jace was counting on it. "Now," he said. His voice was low, commanding, and Mara understood instantly. She pressed herself against the seat as the hover scout surged forward. Jace fired the rear turret, bolts of energy striking the lead mercenaries' bikes. One skidded into the canyon wall, another tumbled over a ridge. Mara gasped, her fear mingling with awe. Jace wasn't killing them. He was disabling them, turning their aggression against them without shedding blood. His skill was breathtaking, precise, and deliberate. "They're not giving up," Mara said. Her voice trembled. "Then we give them something they won't forget," Jace replied. He brought the hover scout to a sudden stop behind a large rock outcropping, engines humming softly. The mercenaries' bikes appeared in the canyon, moving in confusion, unaware that their target had vanished. Jace activated a series of automated traps he had prepared: gravity flares, small plasma mines, and holographic decoys. The red glows of the mercenaries' sensors lit up the canyon in chaos as they crashed into the traps. Unable to regain control, Mara's chest heaved as she watched the mercenaries falter, realizing that Jace had planned for this moment.
You set this up?" she asked, astonished.
"Years of surviving these plains," Jace said simply. "Every canyon has its secrets. Every ridge has a trap. You learn to use them, or you die." The mercenaries tried to regroup, but Jace was already moving. The hover scout rose above the canyon, engines flaring, and swooped down another narrow pass. Plasma bolts chased them, striking rocks and kicking up dust, but Jace's maneuvers were flawless. Mara's fear turned into exhilaration. She had never felt so alive, and so protected, at the same time. Finally, they reached the edge of the canyon. Beyond lay open desert, dangerous but offering speed and space to maneuver. The hover scout surged forward, engines blazing. The mercenaries followed, fewer now, disorganized and vulnerable. Jace's eyes flicked to Mara, and she understood. The final confrontation was here. "They won't stop," she said, breathless. "Then we finish it," he replied. Jace activated the hover scout's advanced defense systems. Energy shields shimmered around the ship, and automated targeting systems locked onto the remaining mercenaries. Plasma bolts fired from the ship's rear turret, striking bikes and forcing the riders into the sand. One by one, the mercenaries were disabled, trapped, and neutralized. Mara watched in awe, heart racing. She had never seen such control, such precision, and such determination. The last mercenary tried a desperate move, speeding directly toward the hover scout. Jace didn't panic. With a quick maneuver, he dodged, forcing the mercenary to crash into a rock formation. Silence fell over the desert. The canyon was empty except for the wreckage of bikes and the hum of the hover scout. Mara leaned back, exhausted, shaking from adrenaline. We did it," she whispered. Jace didn't respond immediately. He kept scanning the horizon, ensuring that no other threats remained. Then he finally relaxed slightly, lowering the shields and letting the ship settle. "Not out of danger forever," he said, voice calm but with a hint of satisfaction. "But we've survived this day." I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Jace replied. "Just survive. That's thanks enough." They glided across the plains in silence, the twin suns rising higher, casting light over the jagged desert. Mara felt the weight of exhaustion, but also a new strength growing inside her. She had survived the outer plains not by running alone, but by trusting someone who had chosen to stand with her. As they reached a secluded plateau, Jace landed the hover scout gently. Mara stepped out, stretching her sore muscles. The desert stretched endlessly around them, harsh, unforgiving. But now she felt a glimmer of hope. She could see the tracks of the mercenaries disappearing into the distance. They had lost the chase, for now. "You know," Mara said quietly, "I never thought anyone would risk themselves for me." Jace looked at her, gray eyes steady. "Sometimes you find people who choose the right thing over the easy thing. That's survival out here. Not just running, not just fighting, but protecting others when you can." She had spent months running, hiding, and surviving alone, thinking that trust was a weakness. But now she realized that trust could be strength, and Jace Holloway had shown her exactly that. The twin suns rose fully above the desert horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. Mara felt a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in months. They were free for now, but freedom came with responsibility. The outer plains were still dangerous, and the universe beyond was even more merciless. Yet Mara knew that with Jace beside her, she had a chance to survive anything. "Where do we go now?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Jace replied. "For now, the plains are ours. Tomorrow we make plans. But tonight," he gestured to the horizon, "we rest." The twin suns warmed her skin, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. She had survived the outer plains, survived the hunters, and survived the night. And she had done it not alone, but with someone who had chosen to protect her when it mattered most. She turned to Jace, wanting to speak, but words felt unnecessary. The calm confidence in his eyes, the unwavering determination, and the unspoken promise of safety said everything she needed to know. He had chosen her life when it would have been easier to take it. And in a universe that often took everything from the weak, that choice was more powerful than any weapon. The night fell again, but Mara was no longer afraid. Somewhere beyond the cliffs and canyons, danger might wait, but for now, she had survived. She had learned that survival wasn't just about running, fighting, or hiding. It was about courage, strategy, and choosing to trust in the right people. And Jace Holloway had been that choice, the man who had lowered his gun, protected her, and taught her that hope could exist even in the harshest deserts of the galaxy. As the twin moons rose, casting silver light over the plains, Mara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She was alive. She had survived. And with Jace by her side, she knew that whatever came next, she had the strength to face it. For the first time in months, Mara felt something she hadn't dared to hope for. A future. And for Jace, the quiet rancher of the Outer Plains, it was enough to know that he had made the right choice.